Buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Tenemos una excelente audiencia hoy, sobre 40 personas. Se han unido al seminario. Hoy es nuestra 10ª edición del Seminario de Ingeniería Industrial UCN y tenemos un invitado de Gran Bretaña, del Reino Unido, perdón, y su presentación va a ser en inglés, por lo tanto voy a continuar en adelante en inglés para que el profesor Dylan pueda entender lo que estoy diciendo. So, welcome everyone. Today is a new session of our series of seminars in industrial engineering at UCN, Chile. With us today, we have Dr. Dylan Jones. He is a professor of operational research based on the School of Mathematics and Physics at the University of Portsmouth in the United Kingdom. Hopefully I pronounced the name of the university well.
Yes, you did.
Dr. Jones, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us and giving us some time to share with us your research. So you can go ahead and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that welcome, and thank you also for the invite to speak to you today. I'm going to share through a PowerPoint presentation in a moment, and I will discuss the slides one by one. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. I don't know if you have questions during the presentation or you prefer them late. I'm happy either way. Also, if you cannot understand my English or British English accent, then please also let me know and I will try and speak more slowly. So, right, you should now be seeing my my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, we can see it very well.
Okay, great. So my talk for today, my seminar, is entitled A Multi-Criteria Model for the Allocation of New Medical Robotic Devices to Treatment Centres. It's actually by myself and two colleagues from business school at the University of Portsmouth, Doctors Sina Farouzi and Ashraf Labib. Beyond that, it is funded by the European Union under their interregional scheme, the 2Cs MERS ASEAN, which is the different languages for the area that's around the south of the UK, the north of France, and coastal Belgium and the Netherlands. So they fund various applications and academic studies that are relevant to the population of this part of the European Union. In this particular instance, it's about healthcare treatment because we have a relatively elderly population that's susceptible to types of localized cancer, such as prostate cancer. So the project was basically about the development of new medical robotic devices for this particular disease, as you will see. I'm based in the Centre for Operational Research and Logistics, where I'm the director. And if you want to take a further look at what we do, here's our web URL, and I'm always happy to correspond if anybody has any queries or wants to work with any of our academic members. So I will start by going through the motivation of the COBRA project, and then I'll look at the techniques that we use. I'll briefly explain. I'm assuming that you have some understanding of operational research and analytics, but not necessarily specialisms in, say, facility location or extended goal programming or healthcare or fuzzy logic, which are the techniques that we use. I'll then talk through the major part of the novelty here, which is the goal programming model, and I'll show you the application of the model to the south of the UK, which is where we have up to now. in the context of the project, this is fairly recent work. So the work was finished around about a month ago and is just being written up for submission to a journal. So reasonably recent application. As I said, it's been the actual project itself goes from 2018 through to 2022, and it's not a pure academic project in that it's working at a relatively high technology readiness level. And so it doesn't just contain universities like ourselves, but also healthcare providers such as hospitals in the UK, in France, and technology companies that will develop the eventual product as well. What we're looking to do, this particular type of cancer treatment known as brachytherapy is currently done by surgeons by hand with assistance of a clinical physicist to tell them where they should be planting radioactive seeds in the prostate, or where they should be putting needles for biopsy. We would like to design a robotic device that's going to automate that process, thereby having some benefits in terms of accuracy, in terms of visibility, in terms of minimizing tissue damage and efficiency of the operation. So currently they work under something called ultrasound, and probably most people have heard of MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. It's a lot more accurate than ultrasound in terms of its fidelity of the picture it can give. So we want a robot that works under MRI, and we want to automate the insertion of either needles if we're doing biopsy to take samples, or radioactive seeds if we're doing brachytherapy. We're also looking at innovations of a flexible rather than a straight needle. So we tend to build like trees in the prostate, for want of a better word. So we lower the number of needle insertions that way and make the whole process more efficient. Actually, this seminar is more, rather than being about the robotics, it's more about the operational research. So we don't need to know too much medical background in order to follow. But just to give you the context of what's happening here, if you talk about radiological cancer treatments, the classic is radiotherapy, probably more well known, where a beam is projected into the tumor. In this case, it might be in the prostate from outside the body, and that's why it's called external beam radiation therapy. So it will be multiple beams, and again, these actually gives rise to quite complex optimization models in where you should place the beams and what strength those beams should be. What we're looking at here is a slightly different technique, whereby we place the radioactive source, you can see here, inside the prostate or inside the organ where there's a tumor. So thereby getting closer to the tumor and providing the radiation dose that way, either for short periods of time with a high dose, or we can leave the seeds in and for a longer period of time. So we have low dose and high dose brachytherapy. And here's a type from the University of Lille. Here's a type of robot with a needle that might be designed. This isn't the actual robot because it doesn't exist yet, but a similar type of robot that would work under MRI. If you're squeamish, I wouldn't look just now, but this is a medical side, so you can see how the needles might enter through to the prostate with an ultrasound scan currently. And this is a 3D image of seeds going into a prostate. Okay. As I said before, this isn't just my work. This project has a whole set of industrial partners spread across France, the UK, United Kingdom, and the Netherlands. So you have people like TU Delft, who are expert at the needle technology, University of Lille, who are expert at robotics, and ourselves, University of Portsmouth, who are more expert at the optimization, operational research. Amongst then you have some hospitals and healthcare providers and some different companies, technology companies in these different nations. Okay, there you see the zone under question. The European Union under this scheme will fund projects that have a good socio-economic impact. So what they're looking for is to improve access to treatment. They're hoping to get better diagnosis and treatment. And it's particularly in demographical and geographical groups with poor current access. So here's a zone. Now, you might think of this as a relatively densely populated zone, and indeed for many, in comparison with many parts of the world it is. But what you also have here is a relatively elderly population that's susceptible, therefore a higher prevalence of certain types of cancer. For instance, down here in the southwest of the United Kingdom, or up here in the north of the Netherlands, you do have some, at least by our Northwestern European standards, some relatively isolated places as well. So this is a zone that we are targeting, but the modelling so far is on the first phase, which is just a model of this part of the United Kingdom you see. It's deliberately missing out here, which is the London region, because we're not primarily looking at densely populated cities, we're looking at more rural areas. Likewise, the Brussels and the Amsterdam and the Paris regions are not included either. So it's more areas with relatively poor current access. Okay, let's go into the operational research a little bit now. Goal programming is a technique from what we call MCDM. So we're making decisions in the presence of multiple, possibly conflicting criteria. Its philosophy is rooted in the work of Herbert Simon, the American economist, who says that as humans and as organizations, rather than trying to just purely optimize measures, we try and achieve a set of conflicting goals as closely as possible. Like a lot of operational research, its roots come in the 1950s and the 1960s, writing up post-Second World War work with the advent of computational power. So in this case, it's mainly the work of Chance and Cooper, but also the seminal work with Ferguson in 1955. I did, along with Professor Tamiz, another professor at the University of Portsmouth, and now retired, we wrote a book on goal programming in about 2010, summarizing about our 20 years of work on this particular topic. So there's a lot of detail there, but for the purpose of this presentation, let's just sum it up by saying that there are 3 variants that we need to know about today. If we're going to have a set of goals and we can't reach all of those goals, we're going to have some deviations from those goals that are unwanted. Like, say, if you were doing more in the commercial sphere, negative profit or lack of profit or excess cost, for example. So unwanted deviations, we need some form of weighting, and we need them all to be measured in the same, or at least comparable units. So if we're just therefore minimizing the sum of unwanted weighted normalized deviations from the set of goals, that's a classic optimization approach, and that's called weighted goal programming. If, however, you want to do a kind of more of a min-max case and you say, yes, but it's not going to be much use if, say, our model is very good for the people who live in southwest of the UK, but terrible for those that live in the east of UK, you realize that it's not purely about just the sum of unwanted goals, it's about the balance between the achievement of the goals too. So we minimize the worst case unwanted weighted normalized deviation from amongst a set of goals. This is called Chebyshev goal programming. If you're familiar with distance metrics, this is based around an L1 distance metric, and this one is Chebyshev is based around an L infinity distance metric. Then in 2001, 2004, we had the work of Professor Carlos Romero from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, who developed various techniques for goal programming, including extended goal programming, which suggested that the truth is neither pure optimization or pure balance, but rather often a parametric mix between the two variants. So he calls this extended goal programming, and that's what we'll be using today. Okay, for those of you familiar with facility location, what we're trying to do is optimize the locations of a number of facilities and the allocation of a set of customers to those facilities. So this could be in a single or multiple objective sense. So whether it's single or multiple objective, I'm just going to call it the cost of that allocation. So if we think of it in terms of minimization, we could also work in a maximum location, but as I've called this a cost, let's work in minimize here. So again, if we just sum up all of the costs of all the different customers to the facilities, then it would be called a p-median problem. Again, that has the same strengths and weaknesses as weighted goal programming, whereas if we wanted to try and balance between the different customers so that trying to make the best one, the worst one a bit better, then we would use something called the P-center approach, which has a synergy with Chebyshev goal programming. Again, the L1 and the L infinity distance metrics. There's an alternative here called a set covering approach, which is well studied in mathematical programming. And there we're trying to locate a number of facilities in order to try and achieve below a certain threshold level of kind of access or cost or distance or time for each customer. Slight variation of this is a maximal covering problem, in which we maximize the number of customers below a set level of cost for each customer. So we're trying to get as many possible customers to fit into that, whatever level of cost we have. Again, there's a couple of multi-criteria here. We could have a multi-criteria in terms of our cost, and we could have a multi-criteria here in terms of combining all of these different variants of facility location into a single model. And we looked in the literature because what has this got to do with the COBRA project? Well, we're trying to locate a number of these new robotic devices. We would put a number of them in the UK and a number of them in France and a number of them in the Netherlands and Belgium. But we want to know how many, given that they're really quite expensive and novel, how many do we need, and in order to give good coverage. So when we looked in the literature, there are some things, papers, articles linking goal programming and facility location. But in terms of healthcare, not so many. And they tended to be like these ones that you see here, both fairly recent, and they're about the humanitarian situations, either the war in Syria or the earthquake that happened in Nepal, and where we should put emergency disaster shelters. Very interesting papers, but not exactly the same as what we were doing. They also both use something called the AHP, the analytical hierarchy process, which requires weights from decision makers, which we would find rather difficult in our setting. Even though we have access to weights, we'd rather present a set of solutions to decision makers rather than getting them to try and weight all of the different criteria. So this is what's called an a priori approach. We'll go for a different approach called an a posteriori approach. Okay, if we're going to map prostate cancer in the UK, you can see from here, obviously gender, it's from the males, but also strongly related to age. And most of the prevalence can be described by those two factors. If you're looking at it from a kind of data analytics point of view, this would be classified as a descriptive analytical work. Here you see a bit of a different take on the south of the UK, the Interreg zone. What you have here is each one of these is blue dots is what we call a postcode district. There are small geographical areas, and we divided this up into 667 different postcode districts, and each of these red larger circles are potential treatment centers. So we're not going to give one of these new robots to some location where, like a new hospital or a brand new hospital where there's no expertise. So we would locate them in existing radiological hospitals which are based there. Now there's a challenge that some boundary problems here, that when we first did it, you know, this was coming up as far away from treatment centres, when in reality it isn't. It's simply that the treatment centre is out of the zone. So there are some treatment centres out of the zone as well. Could be used if it made sense. Here's the kind of, and you can see the kind of density of the south of the UK here, because they are 85 kilometres squared and an average population of 23,000, although there is some variance in that. So when we're going to try and think about how good is access to treatment, we want to know 3 measures really. The prevalence, how many people are likely to have prostate cancer or to be a potential risk from prostate cancer, the access, what's their current access to treatment at the moment, and then we need to combine these 2 measures somehow to form a single measure. At least it's only 2 dimensions into 1 here. So we can use a classical kind of grid-based approach and then go to fuzzy logic. So we can see there's a trade-off here between, say, this, if you dealt with risk likelihoods and consequences, then you might recognize this kind of logic. So up here you have many, but good treatment, but possible in many cases, whereas down here you have far fewer cases, but far from treatment. And the most critical are the ones that combine the both. We used fuzzy logic to come up with a single priority measure, which we call the tau value. Here you can see some of the MATLAB logic and the fuzzy logic about, so I'll call it hot and cold here, but prevalence and access. And you can see from this rules that ending in a different category, membership of a different category gave a certain amount of weighting. So there's no distinction between hot and cold, between prevalence and access here. They're equally weighted. When we look at this, I realize that these place names may not mean a lot to you because they are UK place names, but to tell you the significance of this, what we have is a mixture of places like Chelmsford that has good access, but very high levels of prevalence, some of the highest in the UK, Clacton reasonably similar, and here Bideford, Great Yarmouth and Bognor Regis are all coastal towns where people go to retire, so an more elderly population, but they're also far away from treatment centres. And mostly, although there's some medium level of prevalence, there's also a lot of access challenges here because these are quite remote postcode districts. So this, basically we could have a whole map. What we're going to do is a kind of Pareto logic, and anything that's in the top 20% of tau scores, we're going to call priority postcode districts. And these are the very highest of those. When we came to discuss with the physicians and the healthcare managers how many new robotic devices, we came up with the answer that we would try between 2 and 5. And the key thing, at least in the UK, is this concept of 45 minutes travel time. Ideally, the UK government would like everybody to be located within 45 minutes of their treatment centre, allowing for patient choice as well. So there's various objectives here. Some of them are they're all about travel times, except for this one, which is more of a set covering approach. Some of them are about priority. Some of them are about the general case. And just to go here before I show you the actual breakdown, there's a useful survey of healthcare facility location models in this paper. So we are discrete here. We're not just putting our centres anywhere. We are locating them in pre-existing discrete locations, just working out which ones. It is multi-criteria, and it has some elements of all of those variants of facility location. And it's not an emergency situation, but it is a primary care, using UK terminologies for healthcare. If you look at the 6 objectives or criteria, you can see that some of them trying to fit the maximum number of postcodes within 45 minutes, either priority or not, is a maximal covering problem. If we're talking about total travel times, it's a P median problem. If we're trying to deal with the worst case, then it's a P center problem. Some of these are priority, some of them are general. This one, number 4, is quite different because it's a set covering, in that we're trying to push against the number of robotic devices so that we get, we see what the effect of adding extra or taking away devices is. Onto the preliminary and mathematical notation for the goal program now. The XIs, this is classic. So we have a number of possible treatment centres. It turns out to be 42 if you include those out of the region, and 667 postcodes. So this is classical binary facility location logic. If we place one, and then if we assign a postcode to one. Here we have some goal programming deviations, excess travel times, and various measures of the maximum mu and lambda. Quite a lot of data here. Travel times is the main piece of data between a postcode and a treatment center, worked out through geographical information systems. Here's a binary data variable to see if it is within 45 minutes of travel time. Here's our tau values, but this time as a binary, to see if it's in the top 20% or not. So if it's a priority postcode or not. L and U between 2 and 5. Here's our set of weights, which will start off with equal weighting. The Romero parameter between balance and optimization. And some various averages and capacities as well in terms of postcodes and patients and estimated numbers of patients. Okay, I know mathematics in presentations is somewhat difficult, so I'm not going to go through a set by set, but sufficient to say that here's the extended goal programming achievement function with the balance term, the Chebyshev term, and the weighted term, the sum of deviations there. Here's those 6 goals that I described earlier, and these 6 are just to enforce this lambda so that we can work out the weighted, weighted, unwanted, normalized, that's your normalization constant there, deviation, and there's your weight here, is all below this maximum lambda here. Okay, constraints, again, classic facility location. You can't assign something unless there is a center there, unless you locate a robotic device there. Each postcode exactly 1 treatment center. Here's our between 2 and 5 robotic devices, where XI, if they're located there or not. Here's a capacity in terms of patients. And here's some logic about the maximum travel times for the priority postcode. You can see this marker tau j there. Here's excess travel time over 45 minutes for each postcode. And here's the capacity of the clinic, only this time in postcodes allocated. There's a kind of double level capacity there. Right, okay, I realize I went through that fairly quickly, but as I said, we are producing a paper with a lot more details, or this talk is being recorded. So in terms of the experiments, 42 potential centers, 667 postcodes, 2 to 5 with top 20% priority initially all of the equal weights here, and we're going to use a sensitivity analysis algorithm because we don't know this is true or not, but we're more interested in the kind of range of solutions that exist rather than the particular getting the decision maker to set weights. So what we do is a weight sensitivity analysis, and we use 22 different sets of weights. And for the extended goal programming, we use 3 different values of alpha. This one to represent weighted. This one's a mix between weighted and Chebyshev, and this one's more towards the Chebyshev L infinity side. And we use the software lingo 18. It is a little challenging because 42 times 667, you can see that there are quite a lot of binary variables. So you're into the tens of thousands of binary variables. But the modern versions of Lingo are quite good at this type of problem. Sometimes we had to resort to scenario-based optimization. So what that means is that I know that there's one solution at 2, 3, 4, and 5 robots. So we could therefore fix the sum of xi, or the number of robots, to 2, 3, 4, and 5 respectively, and solve 4 smaller submodels if we can't solve the big model. What I mean by can't solve the big model is if it ran for 10 hours of optimization and it didn't produce an optimal solution. Eventually doing this, and with quite a lot of the average solution time was around about 30 minutes. But nevertheless, with 66 optimizations, that's a fair amount of computational effort, but it managed to mean that we solved all of the models to optimality. This is an example of the different weight sets we can use. So this is from my 2011 eJAW paper. So you can see that we raise one weight, working through the weights, and then we start to raise pairs of weights basically in turn. There are 22 of those. The full set, for the sake of brevity, has been omitted. Likewise, all of the solutions found, we were quite pleased because the 66 optimizations produced 25 distinct solutions. 18 of those are distinct in the actual locations because they could be distinct just in the allocations, so the same hospitals, just different patient allocations. So 25 distinct solutions, and here are the first 10. You can see each one of them has a code. You see already, so A, B, C, D, E. So when we do weight set 6, A has appeared again. So that's the same solution there. Some of these, so if we talk about the 3 sets of, spaces of a goal programming model, we can see that the first space was the weighting space, which is 6-dimensional here, but the solution itself comes through in 2 spaces. This is part of decision space, it's the location part. So this is the actual xi's that are equal to 1. Obviously, there's a whole set of yij's that is too big, but an allocation that goes behind each one of these as well. And across here, you have the third space, which is the 6-dimensional criteria space, or in this case, the unwanted deviational variable space. And you can see a fair amount of variance in these different solutions, which is good. So excess travel times, anything from 1 to 3 minutes up to 10,000 minutes, where you only have 3 robotic devices there. So we were pleased with the range and the spread of the results. The next challenge will be to explain that to the stakeholders and try to analyze these results. The first thing to note is, given that these are quite expensive, do we want 5, 4, or 3 robots? The answer is, well, by the way, 2 robots did not work out as feasible because of capacity issues. The answer is you can have 4 or 3 robots, but as you can see, if you want these to be well used or people to have access, then having 3 robots, there's a long distance of 8,000 extra minutes across the postcodes of travel time. 96 extra postcodes failing to get within 45 minutes of the travel time, which is the government set limits, and worst case over 28 extra minutes of the priority. So you can see that there's a significant trade-off, even going to 4 robots and definitely to 3 robots. So we would tend to argue for a 5 robot solution there because of these trade-offs that you can see. Okay, that's the equal weight solution is shown in bold. If you have worked in facility location, this really seems to be quite interesting what's happening here. This is the frequency out of the 66 solutions. So you can see that facility location models, they tend to anchor in this case amongst certain locations like Taunton, Norwich, Southampton, and Barking appear, and then in order to achieve all of these differences, they pivot between some of the other locations that aren't used so often. The one location that was outside of the 2C zone is one in East London, next to that area of high prevalence that you saw earlier in Barking. So as these geographical terms probably don't mean a lot to you, I'm just heading back to the map. So you can see that often it placed in Taunton here, sometimes in the southwest where it is quite sparsely populated. Sometimes it used one in Truro or Plymouth or South Devon. So there's a fair amount of variance of these 5 centres used here. Southampton was one of the kind of anchor, I'll call them anchor places for this region around here. There's one in Barking here that provide a good coverage of this Kent and Sussex region that you see in the southeast of the UK here, and Norwich was chosen a lot because it provides a good coverage of this rural region here. So the solutions make sense from a logical point of view. Okay, going on to the other trade-offs. Analysing trade-offs in a 6-dimensional objective space can be quite complex. We've already noted that the number of robots and all of the other 5 objectives have a strong trade-off. We can also see that there's a trade-off between concentrating on priority zones, postcodes, and the more general case postcodes. So if you look at solutions F and H, back to the table, F and H, you can see that in order to get better priority, like this one, for example, has gone from 29 down to 7 priority postcodes that didn't meet the 45-minute access rule. But to do that, the general travel has gone up from 123 to 830, and this general measure here went up from 18 to 930 minutes travel. So you can see that there's a trade-off between priority and general postcode objectives that you see throughout. The other more technical thing to note is that because some of these objectives are discrete, you can only have like 2, 3, 4, 5 robot solutions. And indeed, even the 5th one, which is the number of postcodes, there was only certain values that can be achieved. This made L-infinity solution really quite difficult, and also getting a good spread of solutions in objective space quite difficult. So there's probably a little bit more work to do on sort of analysing these type of discrete value criteria and how they have effects on different types of goal programming models. The unusual thing about goal programming here is that if you went to an operational research textbook, one of the first things it will tell you about goal programming is an a priori technique, because you ask the decision makers to basically elaborate their goals and their weights and their target values, and then you solve the model. We've kind of turned it on its head here, in that we've used it in what we call an a posteriori manner, more like sort of efficient set Pareto optimization, in that we're not asking the decision maker any of these, rather we're doing the optimization and then presenting solutions to the decision makers. Weight sensitivity and analysis we found very effective for this model. I will say that hasn't been the case in every model we've worked on. Smaller models have produced smaller numbers of distinct solutions, but here, because of the complexity of the problem, we have a lot of different solutions. Extended goal program, some usage. Probably the key driving force was the weight sensitivity analysis algorithm, but we added, if you think about it, 16 different solutions found at 0.01. If we're going to add 0.5 to that as well, we had another 4 and then another 5 at 0.99. So it did add some, but particularly at 0.99, the minimax was not ideal, because when we look at some of the solutions, because of the discrete nature of some of those criteria that I mentioned before, made it quite difficult to balance out the criteria when you've got some criteria that have got relatively few potential values. And the other thing that the models seem to struggle with is the fact that if you look at the fifth goal, it was a p-center goal, and it was already in minimax form. So now you're talking about the minimax of the minimax when you go to, because you max of goal programming with a minimax of facility location, and that's not always a good combination, in that you're just concentrating on a very small subset of the goals and of the postcode. So that was some challenges there that probably meant that 0.01 was providing most of the interesting solutions. So to draw conclusions, we believe that it's been effective in having a look and demonstrating to the decision makers here, who are going to be the healthcare authorities and also basically the non-academic partners from the COBRA consortium, the healthcare authorities who are going to use these robotic devices, and the developers who are going to have to decide how many of them to develop and where they should go to maximal effect. It's proved quite efficient in examining some of the trade-offs between priority and general access. In terms of analytics, as the word analytical methods is quite a popular data analytics. First of all, we started with the descriptive sort of mapping out prevalence and access, and then we moved to a more prescriptive analytical models of extended goal programming, where we're using in order to actually make decisions on where we should be placing these devices, which should hopefully be designed and placed within the next 2 to 3 years. We looked at trade-offs between the priority versus general. We did some location analysis to see where the common locations are, and we managed to do some 6 criteria trade-off analysis, which is probably one of the most complex goal programming trade-offs that I've looked at over all of the goal programs that I've developed over the past few years. In terms of optimization and healthcare technologies, it's obvious that optimization has a role to play. What I'm talking about here hasn't been about assisting the robot with by trajectory planning. We're doing that as another part. So it's not really about treatment optimization. It's more about usage and fair access optimization that we've looked at here. But we're looking at both of these, and through a whole range of healthcare needs, not least the current unfortunate coronavirus outbreak. There's going to be a need for optimization strategies and technologies, and that will require our kind of analytical skills as operational researchers. Again, demographic changes in the United Kingdom, Northwest Europe, many parts of the world are leading to more complex treatment needs and a greater expectation of treatment. We are seeing more sophisticated healthcare technologies, which is good news, but it does mean that we need more decision analytical solutions associated with them in the healthcare sector. Many different countries have different models of healthcare, privatized, semi-privatized, or state owned and controlled, like here in the United Kingdom. Okay, what are we planning to do next? Well, this is only, as I said, this is the first phase of the project, which was basically the trial examples for the United Kingdom. We now need to work with partners in France, the Netherlands and Belgium to work out how many and where to put their particular devices, robotic devices. It will be, they may have a different opinion to 45 minutes, so the model may change slightly. They may have different, slightly different objectives and goals, but we will have a look at that as we modify our goal program. One thing that anybody that's worked with goal programming or multi-objective, multi-criteria methods in general will know is that trying to control the weights and the parameters can be a bit of an art as much as a science. So if we can apply some artificial intelligence and a bit more sort of trying to combine weight and parameter sensitivity analysis to zone in what I call regions of change where the solutions are changing rapidly, that would be a good line of research. As I said, the discrete valued criteria and this layering of minimax needs to be investigated too. It's pretty typical that we try and answer one research question and we end up with 6 new research questions to investigate, but that's not a bad thing. The other big topic in the country studied is patient choice. So we need to deal with the P-next problem, which is basically if they can't go to one, or what happens if they want to choose a different center, what would be there. We could use something called extended network goal programming rather than just extended goal programming, which is a technique I published in 2016 in eJAW to try and look at the fairness between these different geographics or even across the different countries in Northwest Europe. And again, I've drawn some kind of casual linkages as we've gone through the presentation between facility location and goal programming modeling, but a formalization of that would be nice in terms of the kind of looking at the synergies and advantages and disadvantages and the way the two techniques are combined. There's another potential line of research here. If anybody's interested in any of these lines of research here at the University of Portsmouth, we're more than happy to cooperate with researchers. We already have some links with your university, but we're always happy, across this or a wide range of operational research to work on collaborations. Okay, well, thank you very much for your virtual attendance and once again for inviting me to speak. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand you back to the chair of the session.
Excellent work, Dr. Jones. Thank you so much for your presentation. Very interesting indeed, because we actually are working also here on a location problem for the ambulance for the ambulance services here in the region. So there was a very common work there, and I was very interested on some of the. I mean, you mixed several methods, so I thought that was quite well done. And I wanted to ask you, and with this, I'm going to begin with the question part of the session. I usually start myself because I try to take some notes. I wanted to ask you how or who decided the many criteria that you had, and also this goals like this 45-minute limit or the capacity of the hospitals. What was their relationship with the stakeholders, and also when you were able to finish the work, how were you able to recommend a particular solution to the stakeholders?
Okay, thank you for your questions. They're all logical questions. The answer is, first of all, the 45 minutes is the easiest part to answer because that comes from UK government policy, which dictates, that patients should have access to their care, particularly cancer care, within a 45-minute limit. the usage of 6, which is quite a high number of criteria, comes from discussing with the stakeholders of the COBRA project. In particular, the local hospital in Portsmouth Hospitals Trust have been very useful because they're the ones that actually they liaise with our National Health Service, as they are part of our National Health Service. And so they are a centre for prostate cancer treatment in the UK, so they can therefore inform us on what they regard as important in terms of patient access. Further refinements would then go out to actually asking patient groups themselves and surveying, but we haven't gone that far. We've taken expertise from the clinicians and the managers working themselves. When we go out to France, as I said, or Netherlands, then these criteria might change slightly because it might not be 45 minutes in France. It might be some other criteria that they regard as important. It should hopefully fall into the same framework, as there's quite a broad range of goals there. The concept of using priority and general postcodes kind of comes from the logic of Interreg, the actual funder of the project, when it wants to prioritize zones where there's poor access or high levels of prevalence. So that's why we're going for those particular distinctions between general and priority. The actual how many we put in the priority set, we used a kind of informal Pareto rule. We went for the top 20%, but again, that could be varied too. Your final point is quite a challenging one because of the complexity of this model, and the solutions ended up. In practice, we probably would recommend a 5-robot solution because we can demonstrate the trade-offs that would really show heavy, difficulties against some of the criteria, or poor values if we did not have 5 robotic devices. Beyond that, we then have to explore a small set of solutions with the decision makers to see which particular solution they would like. I mean, the easiest thing is to start with the equal weight solution, but there's no guarantee that that is particularly the one that they are going to go for. So we're planning a kind of interactive process. Unfortunately, this has been slightly delayed because we can't have physical meetings, as you probably know why, because of the coronavirus situations. But that will be part of the confirmation process. So the answer is that we haven't recommended a single solution yet, but we have a small set of key solutions that we're going to discuss with them to see where we go. Interestingly, one slightly awkward thing, but it shows that it's a scientifically neutral process, is that Portsmouth was never chosen as a centre, even though the advice came from Portsmouth, from the healthcare, which is slightly awkward, but shows that there's no bias, I suppose.
Right. That's very interesting. Right. Thank you, Dr. Jones. This is where anybody in the audience can open their microphones. I activated the option so anybody can ask any questions.
Well, Dylan, first of all, thank you for accepting the invitation. I'm really happy with that. So we are glad that you are participating. An interesting thing, especially for our students, is that we may see a very interesting and practical application of several or techniques, right? For us, it's very useful and interesting to observe that, right? Well, my question is not quite focused on the modeling, but also in practical terms, usually it's easy to observe some reasons to divide the region, for example, like geographical reasons, administrative reasons, or something like that. And naturally, you will observe smaller instances, right, sizes, but maybe you may lose something in terms of optimality, for example. Do you think that, for example, in this case, you may lose too much if you divide in 2 or 3 smaller regions?
You mean of the United Kingdom, of the area? I mean, I mean, we've gone to 667 postcodes, which is probably a fair level of fidelity. We can't really go, so each one of those represent on average 23,000 people. We can't really go any further because of the size of the model that it would produce, at least for modern technologies. It was quite a struggle to solve these to optimality. Yeah, there's always a trade-off again against the level of discretization versus the level of, you know, you're going to lose something when you discretize. But again, what I can say is this is pretty much the natural level of fidelity that seemed to be appropriate of the way that we look at things. When it comes to the UK, obviously it's quite a separate healthcare situation. When it comes to France, Belgium, and Netherlands, it's a little more complex because you've also got national borders to consider as well. So to answer your actual question, I don't think that we've lost too much in this case because I think that it settled down fairly early in a kind of natural level of fidelity that seemed right for the providers, for the hospitals that we were working with.
Okay, well, thank you for.
All right, so the option's still open. Anybody can unmute their mic so you can ask a question.
May I have another short question? Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, for me, it's a little bit hard, honestly, to imagine or visualize the exact effect of choosing a higher alpha or smaller alpha. I know in general terms what happened. You go for optimization or go to equity or I don't know, balance. Sorry, you say balance, but you choose three cases: the two extreme, 0.01 and 0.99, and something in the middle, something 0.5. So, what will we have if we consider, for example, 0.25 or 0.75? Is something relevant that it may happen, or is something quite similar?
Yeah, I don't think that this was, I think that the alpha analysis was less useful in this particular case than the W analysis, the weight sensitivity analysis, for the reasons that I laid out. Obviously, I think that this kind of design of experiments type approach of just picking three values of alpha, obviously, is not, again, is probably not the most sophisticated either, which is why I made one of the comments that what we really need is an AI type approach that starts to look at all of the different range of alpha and starts to have a look at where the critical values of alpha is, because as you said, there could be something interesting happening at 0.25. Varying alpha did give a bit of extra information. If you think about like 16 solutions found through weight sensitivity, alpha equals 0.001, and then we add another 4 and we add another 5 at two different values of alpha. So it came up with some extra information. Who knows, if I'd have done 0.25 and 0.75, you might have had another 1 or another 2, you know, potential solutions in there. But again, I think what your question is kind of leading to is something that I agree with, is that what we really need is an intelligent sort of AI based approach to try and root out the good values of alpha.
Yeah, got it. Thank you very much.
So I have a following question there. Yeah, so the alpha there. Well, I haven't gone into too much deep in multi-criteria, but I'm beginning to. And so from what I know, when you do a weighted sum, and the problem is not convex, you may miss some of the efficient solutions by varying weight. So in this application, do you think that you might be missing some of these efficient solutions?
Oh, inevitably, yes, because there's under a 6-dimensional weight space, there'll be many different solutions. This isn't, I mean, the theory you gave is something from the from more like efficient set generation kind of paradigm of multi-criteria approach. So what they're trying to do is provide an even set of efficient solutions. Probably in this practical situation wouldn't be possible because some of the criteria are quite discrete valued. So as I said, you would really struggle to get an even representation of the Pareto set. Where the kind of proponents of goal programming like myself and the proponents of efficient set generation kind of differ is I tend to look at something that's more pragmatic in trying to produce enough solutions to demonstrate to the decision maker, you know, what the range of different solutions are, whereas people from efficient set generation kind of school want to get a very nicely graduated set from which they can then pick those solutions to present to the decision maker. It's a fine distinction, but the answer is yes, almost certainly we'll be missing some potential solutions, but then I think any technique will do.
Sure. Okay, so this problem is very interesting for me, so I do have another question. So it has to do with the fact that the problem is discrete, and so it may have multiple optimal, and so do you think, I mean, did you check whether you had multiple optimals? So because if you had multiple optimals on those solutions that you found, maybe the rank, remember, I remember a table where each location was ranked by the number of time that I would appear on the different solution set. And so I wonder if different optimal solution would may vary that ranking significantly.
Yeah, that's why when we come to the weights, we never use a weight of 0, but you can see that they all of those weights had a 0.04 or 0.01 in the case of alpha, because if you go down too close to 0, you greatly increase your chances of alternative optimum solutions occurring. The reality is that with this particular, I don't think that because of the fairly dense A matrix, which is basically the technological coefficients of a lot of different travel times, you probably are not going to get a lot of alternative optimal solutions, providing you don't go too close to 0 for your different criteria. If you did, it would be relatively around the same kind of allocation. It might be 1 or 2 postcodes allocated differently, rather than I think it would be highly unlikely that you'd have an equivalent a location as opposed to an allocation change. Right. Because if you go from like location 14 to location 12, you're doing a huge change and it wouldn't be the same optimum value, or it would be highly, highly unlikely that that would happen.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Thank you. All right, well, we're 5 minutes over. Unless there's one question there, I know Paula and I took most of the time.
Hi, Vilan, this is Elias from Mexico. How are you?
Oh.
Do you hear?
I can hear you.
Oh, yes, yeah, it's listening.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. One recommendation here is that probably you, probably for the project, it could be good to have information on forecasts beyond the prioritization of the postcodes. Probably you would need information about what is the trend on the growth of this kind of disease. I don't know if that's a term, such that you can place the robots in places where it's going to be more needed in the future beyond the current situation. That's one recommendation for your project, but how you did was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you make a very valid point there, in that everything that I've done or we've done is a snapshot, in effectively at a point of time, and as the situation evolves, then eventually the location decision might change, or at least we should be looking at the position in the future, given that there's like 2 or 3 years before we place these postcodes. So the third type of analytic that I didn't mention is predictive analytics. So we talked about descriptive and we talked about prescriptive, but you're correct that we might need to do some kind of predictive modeling to try and look at what's going to happen in 5-10 years, and would the solution still be optimal. That could be quite challenging with the information that our NHS has, but a very valuable point. So thank you, Elias.
Excellent. All right. All right. Thank you, Elias. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you again, Dr. Jones, for your time and joining us here in our seminar. Thank you, everyone. We had over 50 people attending the seminar, so this is very encouraging. We will make sure to continue this effort weekly on every Friday. Also, remember we will have this video available on YouTube, in our YouTube channel, Industrial UCN. So just search for that, and then you will find all of the seminars that we have previously aired. So thank you everyone for attending. Muchas gracias. Y con esto terminamos la sesión. Goodbye, Dr. Jones. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dylan. Bye-bye.
Bye.